Mohamed. He's currently an assistant professor of epidemiology here at UC. And he's coordinator for epidemiology in Masters in Health Administration program. He has previously worked a lot in dengue and dengue control, you know, mosquitoes. And he's worked as an epidemic intelligence service officer and later as epidemiologist. He has worked throughout the Caribbean, especially in St. Kitts, Nevis, and Puerto Rico.
Yes.
And today he's going to talk to us a bit about dengue virus in blood donations. I think in Puerto Rico example of Puerto Rico.
This is Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So let's hand it over to Dr. Mohamed, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. All right. So first of all, let me thank your coordinator for inviting me to speak to you. I won't keep you here more than, I probably won't talk more than about half an hour. And I don't know if I should go back to the camera or to you all, but anyhow, in the first place to set the stage for the presentation, if any of us, or God forbid, a family member or a loved one needs blood or some blood products in some emergency situation, we all have that assumption that the blood is safe, right? So the National Blood Transfusion Services here locally, they screen blood for the usual list. Now, can any of you tell me what are some of the agents that blood should be screened for? What kind of diseases exactly? What kind? What's the first one to come to mind? The very first one. STDs. Which two? HIV, syphilis. Right? So blood is also screened for hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HCLD1. And a lesser known fact, is also screened for Chagas disease. Now, all that is the preamble to set up this presentation. Blood is not routinely screened anywhere in the world for dengue virus. Okay? So what I'm going to present to you all is, we're going to take a step back and answer the question, should we even be concerned about dengue in blood donations? Is dengue virus even present? So this study was set in Puerto Rico, which is in the north. I'll give you some details. In the first place, I'll give you some general introduction, if the laptop will cooperate. Okay. So just by way of introduction, dengue virus causes dengue fever and more severe manifestation, dengue hemorrhagic fever. Okay? So there are 4 dengue serotypes, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Infection with any one of those can cause potentially life-threatening disease. Now, as we all know, are we all from Trinidad and Tobago? Alright, so as we all know, the vector for dengue fever is Aedes aegypti, right? Black and white striped legs. Here's an image before and after a blood meal. Okay? So a little bit on the mosquito, just because there are dengue cases going around. It's a domestic mosquito. We don't find it in the bush or in ravines or in rivers. We tend to find it breeding around the house. Used tires, flower pots, any kind of artificial container that could cool stagnant water and provide a breeding site for the mosquito. Okay? Now, most persons infected with dengue actually do not have symptoms. So many of us here in this room may have had dengue in the past without knowing it. And in fact, some studies have said as high as 90% of all infections do not have symptoms. And that is not well understood. When we talk about symptomatic dengue presentation, there's undifferentiated fever, which is fever, achiness, pain behind the eyes, back pain, nausea, vomiting. When we talk about severe dengue, there's dengue hemorrhagic fever and dengue shock syndrome. So this is illustrated on this slide, where we really find what's called the proverbial tip of the iceberg phenomenon. Okay? Most dengue infections are asymptomatic. A small fraction at the tip of the iceberg that actually is symptomatic, a small proportion of those is actually detected by surveillance, depicted by that very tiny triangle over there. Okay? So whenever you hear surveillance reports stating that there are X number of dengue cases in a given year, rest assured it's on the report. Alright, we're in business. So Now what I'm going to demonstrate here is the cause of dengue infection. First of all, the infected vector, the Aedes aegypti mosquito, feeds and transmits virus to some susceptible hosts, after which the individual undergoes an incubation period of roughly about 5 to 7 days. After the incubation period, viremia develops. This is when you can actually detect dengue virus in the person's bloodstream. Okay? Now, this again is an interesting fact. Even after the start of viremia, it takes roughly a day or a day and a half before you start having symptoms. Now, the reason I point this out is, in that highlighted area right there, potentially if you go to donate blood and you're in that 1 day window highlighted in blue, you could actually have dengue virus in your blood and not have symptoms. You understand what I mean? So at that point in time, there's a chance where you could introduce dengue virus unknowingly into the donor blood pool. So, again, 2 things to keep in mind on this slide. First of all, you can be infected with dengue virus and not have symptoms. Secondly, you can actually go to donate blood if you're really unlucky in that 1 day window there before you actually develop symptoms. Okay? And again, as you know, as I'll illustrate for this study, when you do donate blood, they ask if you're feeling well, you screen for fever. Because if you actually have a fever, you're sick, you should donate blood, right? So, now when we talk about the epidemiology of dengue fever, it's considered to be the most important mosquito-borne virus, and a conservative estimate is that 1/3 of the global population lives in areas that puts them at risk of dengue infection. So that's roughly 2.5 billion people. Again, conservatively, there are at least 15 million cases reported per year. And let's take a closer look at this map. What you see going from north to south, and again, this range coincides with the range of the vector Aedes aegypti, as well as the Asian tiger mosquito Aedes albopictus, which is capable of transmitting dengue virus as well. But the interesting thing is, the range of dengue fever has been expanding further. And what we're finding is that out of the blue, there are cases of dengue reported in France. So this publication here shows the first 2 locally acquired dengue fever cases in metropolitan France, in the city of Nice, and surprise, surprise, Croatia as well. So much so that a German tourist visited a resort town in Croatia, went back to Germany, and took back dengue fever with him. So again, we're seeing dengue popping up in northern regions. So this map that I'm showing you here, that range may expand further north and further south. So let's take a closer look at the Americas. When we look at surveillance data over the past couple of decades, what we do notice is an increase in the trend in reported dengue fever cases. Okay? And there's several reasons for that. If any of you has any questions, do let me know and I can try to explain that to you afterwards. So let's shift gears and talk about the study population, Puerto Rico. Any of you been in Puerto Rico before? Okay, so we have one. But it's a US territory, official language is Spanish. Population is roughly 4 million. It's actually a very densely populated island. This is where it's located, highlighted in red. It's just east of the Dominican Republic. This slide shows surveillance data for dengue fever in Puerto Rico. And what you do notice is, first of all, every year there are cases of dengue fever reported, firstly. And just like Trinidad and Tobago, we see more cases in the rainy season, the second half of the year. There are 2 outbreak years, back in the 90s, 94 and 1998. What this graph doesn't depict is the year 2010, which is actually the largest outbreak in recorded history in Puerto Rico, over 20,000 cases. So again, to bring my background, we don't often think of dengue virus as being transfusion transmissible, but there are isolated cases in the literature where dengue has been transmitted not through mosquito-borne infection or mosquito-borne transmission. First of all, a report where dengue was transmitted through solid organ transplants, one from Puerto Rico where a person got dengue after a bone marrow transplant, etc. And several nosocomial infections where people were exposed in the laboratory. But what I will highlight, to date, there are 2 published reports on dengue acquired through blood transfusion. Now, the challenge I hope you'll all appreciate is, if you're in a dengue endemic place, how do we distinguish dengue that is naturally acquired from a mosquito from dengue that's acquired from a blood transfusion? So this is the first published report to everyone's knowledge. This is from the Hong Kong Medical Journal. So back in 2007, I think it was, no, I beg your pardon, 2004, 2005, one patient acquired dengue from a blood transfusion. Okay? And dengue is not routinely reported in Hong Kong. This was published in a lesser known journal. It was followed up by a case in Singapore, and this report is published in the New England Medical Journal. One donor in the first row, he donated blood, and 3 recipients of his blood components came down with dengue, one of which had dengue hemorrhagic fever. So again, this is very sensational here. All of whom were discharged in good health. So we know they had dengue, and I think the reason why this publication maybe garnered a bit more recognition is because they actually tested the virus and identified the virus from the donor and the recipient, and did what's called phylogenetics on it. So in other words, found out the genotype of the virus and identified it was the same strain that infected both donor and recipient. Okay? So let's go back to Puerto Rico. The major blood collection agency in Puerto Rico is the American Red Cross. The blood products collected in Puerto Rico, now Puerto Rico has a high proportion of type O blood, so that's why the blood's in high demand. Okay? The blood products collected there, they're used locally, of course. They're also exported elsewhere in the Caribbean, and they're also used in the continental United States. So on average, at the time of this study, there were 77,000 donations collected by the American Red Cross, and those 77,000 donations were used to generate 120,000 transfusible components. Okay? This is how many blood donations just by this one center. This image shows you the screening form when you go in to donate blood. Okay? So you're asked, are you feeling well? And you're also, your temperature is taken as well to ensure you don't have fever. Okay? So the objective here is to identify anyone who is sick, who has fever, and defer them from donating blood. Because you don't want someone who's sick donating blood, right? But again, as I've mentioned before, I hope you all remember, you can either be asymptomatic or in that one-day window before you develop symptoms, and this screening process will not do you any good. So again, in Puerto Rico, there's several thousand dengue cases reported on an annual basis, most of which are asymptomatic. So dengue transfusion transmission can be occurring and without being recognized because of these 2 reasons given below here. Individuals may donate blood prior to symptom onset, or they may be asymptomatic. So we hypothesized that donated blood in Puerto Rico, being a dengue endemic place, contained dengue virus, and the objective of the study was to determine the prevalence of dengue viral RNA among blood donations collected during the dengue season in 2005. So this epidemic curve, this is one of the tools of choice used by epidemiologists, and you'll hear me refer to it a couple of times in this presentation. What we see is in 2005 there was a peak in reported cases in the second half of the year, which is to be expected, that's when the rainy season is. And in red we have confirmed cases. So I'm going to highlight the study period. This was selected because historically this is when we knew the dengue season was. What you'll appreciate is the number of cases that are coming down. Couldn't predict what the curve would look like. It wasn't as high, I guess, as incident a season or as common a season as we would have liked. So during this time period, we collected over 16,000 blood donations, and we subjected them to this test. Now, this nucleic acid amplification test is currently used by the American Red Cross and some other agencies. It's a very, very sensitive tool. Are you all familiar with polymerase chain reaction? So it's more sensitive than PCR. Okay? And it actually is touted as being able to detect 3.5 viral copies per milliliter of blood. So the actual technique is called transcription-mediated amplification, which I'll abbreviate as TMA. And what it is, it's a very, very sensitive tool to, just like PCR, target a particular region of RNA and amplify it so you can detect it. Okay? Now this is used to screen blood for HIV. It's also used to screen blood for West Nile virus, another mosquito-borne virus that gained some notoriety in about 2002 in the US because there was a cluster of transfusion-acquired cases of West Nile virus as well. So case definitions are given above. A TMA positive donation or sample is defined as one with a repeat positive or repeat reactive TMA result, and TMA negative samples were all others. And that's the outcome for analysis. When we ran the TMA, well, I didn't run the TMA. The TMA was run at the Gen Probe lab in the US. Each sample that was positive was retested, then it was diluted 1 to 16 and retested again. Okay? Then they were also subject to Tacman PCR, just to make a comparison. The lab also ran ELISA, or enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay for IgM and IgG antibodies, and they attempted to recover live virus through viral culture. So here's the data analysis plan. Frequencies of donor characteristics were assessed. The outcome of analysis again was TMA positivity. Prevalence was determined, the 95% confidence interval, and then associations between donor characteristics, and we're very limited by what I mean by donor characteristics. I'll show you what I mean. These were assessed using Fisher's exact test and exact logistic regression. So after all was said and done, at the end of the study, over 16,000 donations collected, 12 of which were positive by TMA. Now this may seem to be a very low and unimpressive number, but don't be deceived. This prevalence, it was similar with regards to age, the proportion that was male, first-time donor status. We found that there was a higher proportion of TMA positive donors that were first-time donors. Okay? And everything else is roughly equivalent except for residents in the San Juan metropolitan area. Now I didn't mention this, but San Juan is the capital of Puerto Rico. But roughly half of the whole island's population lives in that metropolitan area. So it's kind of, I don't know if our situation is that similar, but again, picture half of our population living in the environs of Puerto Rico. Okay? So it's a very densely populated area. So this slide shows the results of the crude and the adjusted analyses. Again, Fisher's exact test and exact logistic regression, and woe be unto me not neither of these two covariates were significant in the analysis. Okay? But again, just showing you the odds ratios. First-time donors did have higher odds of being TMA positive, and residents of the San Juan metropolitan area similarly had roughly a threefold higher odds of being TMA positive. But neither of these results is significant. This map shows the distribution of blood donors by municipio of residence. Now municipio means municipality. It's the counties, 78 of which comprise the entire island. And what you see, the heat scale kind of coloring scheme, the deeper shade of red indicates a higher frequency of blood donor. So you find it clustered in this area, which coincidentally is the San Juan metropolitan area, the capital, the most densely populated part of the island. And these white asterisks, and I apologize for them not projecting too well, these show the municipality of residents of all the positive donors. And again, they're clustered around the capital. So this epidemic curve, I tried to assess whether there was any meaningful trend in positive donations over the study period. And again, over that study period, there were between 0 and 2 positive donations every week. No significant trend. So there appears to be no relationship between, at least based on this analysis, between the high point in the epidemic curve and the end of the study period. So in summary, again, the prevalence of dengue viral RNA among these 16,000 blood donations is roughly 1 per 1,300, which, don't be fooled, is a very high number in terms of blood transfusion science. And among these 12 positive samples, 4 were positive by polymerase chain reaction, 3 were dengue serotype 2, and 1 was dengue serotype 3, which coincided with the serotypes detected by routine surveillance in 2005. Okay? So with regards to our limitations, as much as I'm trying to impress upon you that 12 out of 16,000 is not a very low number, it's very difficult to assess any kind of associations. So I did try to counteract this by using exact logistic regression, but as you'll appreciate, no result was significant. Furthermore, we did miss the epidemic by just a shade because we thought that the study period would have coincided with peak transmission that actually was coming down in 2005. And again, the last limitation is we don't know who received these infected components or what happened to them, which is actually grounds for a future study. So these findings do underscore the fact that blood donations may potentially be infected or have dengue virus present in them, and this, I put out to you, may be the case here in Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere in the Caribbean. We don't know as yet. It's actually a very costly study to perform, but this is something I would like to replicate locally to see what the prevalence is here. Just to let you all know, this study was done in 2005, finished up in 2008. Since then, they've replicated the study twice. Both times they found higher prevalences. They did it in years when there were higher cases or higher incidence of dengue infections, and the prevalence actually went up considerably. So again, this prevalence of roughly 1 per 1,000 was sufficient in the case of West Nile virus to trigger a screening strategy in the United States to screen blood for West Nile virus. So the question is, do we consider screening blood for dengue virus? To answer my own question, if you forgive me, we first have to determine if there is dengue virus in the donated blood pool, and then go on from there. So some future considerations in terms of replicating the study, conducting real-time TMA screening of blood as you do for HIV or syphilis or other agents, and then perform look-back investigations. Once you identify donors that were TMA positive, identify the recipients, and then test them for dengue and see who was transmitted. Secondly, we don't really know what happens when someone who is immunocompromised now. Rest assured, if you eat blood, there's a high probability that there's you could be immunocompromised given your stay in the hospital or what have you, need for donated blood. We don't know what happens if someone is immunocompromised and is infected with dengue. That's not well understood. So that needs to be assessed as well. And I hope you'll all appreciate that ethically, you cannot take an immunocompromised person and infect them with dengue. So this kind of data could only be generated from observational study designs. Thirdly, this is where my health policy and health financing colleagues will try to assist me, because I cannot answer this question on my own. You have to determine, yes. Well, immunocompromised means that your immune system is actually suppressed, thus making you more liable to be infected by pathogens. Immunocompromised, well, to answer your question, immunocompromised in general, but if one is immunocompromised and then infected with dengue, it's not what understood. So, as mentioned, the screening process is not cheap. I want to say conservatively it costs about $12 US to screen one sample by this technique, so that's not a negligible sum. So what would have to be done is some type of cost-effectiveness analysis to determine if it is worthwhile to screen blood and avert the 50 or 100 cases that could be spread by transfusion, versus the consideration that the population will have more confidence in the blood supply, right? So again, these are two considerations, two balancing sides that you have to take into consideration. And again, a more rudimentary step, and this is something that I hope to do this year, is to assess the prevalence of dengue virus infection using donations made locally. So, if you will indulge me just for a few minutes, I'm going to shift gears, given that the audience, you all are BME students. First of all, are there any questions before I shift gears? I'm going to rapidly shift gears a bit. Yes?
So, you said that question you want to
the question was, in Puerto Rico, what constitutes an epidemic? Now, an epidemic is defined as any occurrence of disease in excess of what we'd expect. So in the case of Puerto Rico, they have a tried and true, is not perfect, a surveillance system that detects, or cases are reported or detected by the surveillance system, and once that number of reported cases exceeds the historical average by 2 standard deviations for 2 weeks in a row, that's an epidemic. Does that make sense? So 2 weeks in a row in excess of 2 standard deviations above the historical average. So it's not the proportion per se, in as much as a comparison to the historical trend. Yeah. Because the proportions are actually quite small. Yes?
Were you talking about infection? What about deaths?
Deaths from the proportion, that's a good question. So when we look at, there's a construct in epidemiology called the case fatality rate. So you take the number of deaths due to a particular case, particular cause, let's say dengue, divided by the number of cases. Now with adequate treatment, the case fatality rate is actually less than 1%. So it's not very high. But again, as all of us probably know someone who's been infected with dengue or heard media reports, and there's a concept of high impact, low probability events. Okay? Even though the probability of death from dengue is statistically very low, if let's say there's a death in a young person, okay, and it'll impact all of us, to a great extent. So it's not a very common occurrence that people die from dengue. It depends on comorbidities. If they've had dengue in the past, this will kind of impact the case fatality rates as well.
I think you might have a little catch-22 situation here, because to get cost effectiveness, you determine the prevalence of TMA positive donors. But to get cost effectiveness, I think you may need to show how many of those donors would have led to infections had people received the blood. So why I call it a catch-22 situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, is if you screen blood and you discover that somebody's TMA positive, that blood will not necessarily reach the blood supply. So you will never be able to establish that. They may figure that that is a small risk in terms of whether somebody actually contracting dengue, let alone dying from it. So proving cost effectiveness is a little bit tough. Something I wanted to ask you too, the numbers you had after your odds ratios, those were the confidence interval, confidence limits.
Anybody else? No, when I say I'm shifting gears, I'm still talking about dengue. So I like talking about dengue, you probably couldn't tell. So you may have read that the Minister of Health spoke about the possibility of releasing sterile male mosquitoes. So I don't know if you read this about, was it 2 or 3 months ago? So it's a group called Oxitec, you can look them up after, and they have 2 genetically modified mosquitoes. One of which is a sterile male, the other is a female flightless mosquito. Okay? Now the sterile male mosquitoes were released in Grand Cayman, which is the biggest island in Cayman Islands, in 2009. They released 3 million male sterile mosquitoes, and this paper was published in Nature. So they actually found that the genetically modified Aedes aegypti mated with wild mosquitoes. Now I don't know, I haven't gone through, I don't have all the details here, but I do encourage you to take a look at this paper. This is something that you could consider as a means of dengue controlling the vector.
Does a mosquito die once it mates?
No. Once it mates, the offspring cannot reproduce. Wait, let me take that back. They're sterile males.
But they're not going to have any...
They're sterile males, so they don't reproduce.
No, but does the mosquito die? Because, I mean, if you still have other males around...
The mosquito doesn't die. They go out and they mate with wild female mosquitoes and they can't reproduce. So the issue was can these genetically modified mosquitoes outcompete the wild male mosquitoes? And this trial actually shows that it fared well in the Cayman Islands. So...
And there are 2 results, but...
So the question was, are there any negative effects for in terms of getting rid of Aedes aegypti? So what role do mosquitoes play other than transmitting dengue?
Well, if that particular mosquito transport, I don't know, HIV or something.
I've had that question. Anybody? So first of all, only female mosquitoes feed on blood, right? The male mosquitoes play a role in pollination. I don't know if you realize that. The male mosquitoes, they go after flowers, they do the blood. Now, there's a question with regards to mosquitoes transmitting HIV, and that hasn't been proven. Aedes aegypti is a biological vector for dengue, and what that means is the virus actually replicates in the members of the mosquito. So there's actually some evolutionary relationship between the virus and the mosquito. So mosquitoes don't transmit every virus, but they do transmit some mosquito ones. So I encourage you all to take a look at these studies. Okay? So that concludes the seminar, and I'll take any more questions if there are.
So theoretically, you could get rid of the females and just every so often release males.
Exactly.
Pollinate.
Well,
Engineer the males in the lab, and every so often release these males into the society and pollinate, and eventually you get rid of all the females.
well, I would argue, I didn't really answer the question.
Practicing.
I didn't really answer the young man's question with regards to what would happen ecologically if you remove these mosquitoes. And the answer is we don't know. We're not really sure what will happen.
You get less pollination, and you might actually get some.
This one, the Serranians, 2009. Yeah, 2009. That's the other thing too. The animals that feed on mosquitoes as well.
I suspect they will find other things to feed on. I doubt if their diet is only mosquito. They have enough vermin around for them to eat something else.
Is there a reason why is there a reason why we're looking at the map, like we're looking at the prevalence? I mean, it's in the low equatorial pattern. Is there a reason why it's well, I understand the temperate reason or something, but it seems to go pretty south.
I would argue now the prevalence of dengue correlates with the presence of the mosquito, right? Now, there are competent vectors in parts of Western Europe and through roughly half of the United States as well, half the states of the United States. But the argument is, I don't know if you accept this or not, the argument is that there are infrastructural changes in parts of the developed world that essentially decrease the likelihood of contact with mosquitoes. So what I mean by that, people tend to be indoors more using air conditioning and screen windows. As a result, the likelihood of contact with the mosquito is reduced. So I think, now again, I didn't mention this in this presentation, but for the first time in over 50 years, there were cases of dengue in Florida in 2010. And there were 2 cases in Miami. So dengue is slowly starting to creep further north and further south. And I'm focusing on north here, but Buenos Aires in Argentina reported their first cases as well. So again, it's pushing the range is extending both further north and further south. Okay?
Well, I mean, there's more or less a temporary countries out there, such as for first instance.
Yeah. I mean, I have to check that these mosquitoes will survive on the harsh winter. Right?
The same way the mosquitoes come from the tropical climate.
Yeah.
These sterile mosquitoes could probably evolve into something worse.
That's part of the problem. We don't really know, right? But by the way, the mosquitoes don't move to temperate places as much as they go from tropical and subtropical. You don't really find them so much in temperate places.
So is it possible to instead of you have the whole it's using the same idea of genetic engineering to genetically engineer the organisms to transfer that disease?
Yes, and there is a certain bacterium called Wolbachia that there's a group in Australia that's trying to look at that. They're infecting the mosquitoes with the bacterium, which actually reduces their ability to be infected by dengue virus. This is another group doing something different. Okay? Now, there's some instances of success where they've genetically engineered insects to help improve agricultural outputs and so on. Again, we don't know what will happen if you eliminate or eradicate Aedes aegypti on a global scale. We can't answer that question. So, in the Cayman Islands, the wild Aedes aegypti have come back because again, that experiment was just a trial. Okay? Now, I think based on what they found in the head with a wider scale release, they only released them in 2 towns on the island. But the island is smaller. Grand Cayman is smaller than Tobago Island. I can't say how much it is, it's quite a bit smaller than Tobago. Population of about 35,000 people. So, for these trials, they're looking for very small islands. Yes.
One more question. What are some of the, in your opinion, what are some of the medical challenges you see with like working with dengue? Like, what would you want more in medical field to help assist with your dengue?
I would say, well, I am an epidemiologist, so I have my wish list, if you will. I would say in terms of the bigger picture, we don't really know why some people get severe dengue and not others. So the major risk factor to severe dengue is having dengue before. Okay? But that's not an all or nothing kind of phenomenon there. So I would argue, I think it is worth finding out what genes predispose people to severe dengue. And I think if people can be screened for whatever gene that predisposes them to severe dengue at that point, we probably target them for more preventive measures.
Good ideas. And I think what we passed a more rapid test that's probably cheaper for dengue testing instead of the long way.
So cheaper to actually treat someone who has dengue to test to find if
the person has dengue.
If that is new test
TMA? Yeah.
It's cheaper to actually do the TMA test, or it's cheaper to treat the person with dengue?
It's still be cheaper to do the test. Even though the test is expensive. No, I say it's expensive. What kind of test is talking about?
Well, is there like a test?
Well, the several other tests that they use, the advantage in TMA, despite its cost, that is very sensitive. Which is why it's used to screen blood. Now, when we get, for whatever reason, if somebody, if one of us or somebody we know needs blood, needs to be clean, right? We don't want to get some infection from blood. So that's why we use these more expensive tools with greater sensitivity. Now, to answer your question, we run PCR is routinely used. Most often, form of testing, largely raised rapid testing, but locally we do use a rapid test that tests for antibodies. I remember the kits are hand by kits. So what, if any of you had any recently, you probably get results back quickly. But again, the issue is a high possibility of false positives and false negatives. So that's not the gold standard by any stretch of the imagination, it's just a rapid diagnostic tool. Okay? So I would say to go develop your point, try to improve upon your rapid testing that's available, because they have several rapid testing kits, or rapid test kits on the market, one of which is used locally, but it's far from perfect. Right? So because if you have a false negative result, it means you have dengue, but you leave the doctor thinking you don't have it, right? So, alright, so if there are no other questions, thank you all for your attention.